Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can hear the ever-encroaching sound of a beating drum, specifically a 32-bit Game Boy Advance sound font beaten drum. It personifies a primal need to spread the good word of Mother 3 on YouTube. Following dark aspects of Mother, this video is an addendum, a bonus episode focusing on one of these two Vaporware 64 disk drive games headed by Shigesato Itoi. And I'll give you a hint, it isn't cabbage. Now you may be asking, wait, Mother 64? What about Mother 4, 5, and 6 through 63? Bad jokes aside, and as an aside, Itoi was actually responsible for naming this classic console, according to the 64 Dream November 1996 interview as translated by Chewy. Mother, or EarthBound 64 in the West, aka Mother 3 before it was cancelled and released later on the Game Boy Advance, had a couple of subtitles it was known by before landing on the sublime Fall of the Pig King. They were Forest of the Chimera and Forest of Strange Creatures. Those last two subtitles of course place emphasis on the reconstructed creatures of the game. The final official subtitle, Fall of the Pig King, presumably refers to Master Porky Minch, the game's main antagonist, who was confirmed to return by art director Benimaru Ito, Satoru Iwata, and Itoi himself. So what more do we know about Mother 64 specifically, and why have I chosen to make a dark aspects about a game that never saw the light of day? Well, this Nintendo Dream Magazine interview, again translated by Chewy, that is required reading for any Mother 3 fan I've probably referenced too much in my videos, outright tells us from the man himself that the scenario in the N64 version was much, much darker. When Itoi initially wrote a script a decade prior to this interview, he apparently wasn't presented with as many confrontations when it came to dark aspects and sad aspects. Sad aspects, new series for this channel, anyone? Anyway, he initially thought to dig in the direction that would upset people, making for a scenario that was dirtier than what it turned into for the Game Boy Advance version. Itoi then mentioned there were parts that he had only added in order to disappoint the players. After being asked why the GBA version ended up with a lightened scenario, Itoi guessed that it's because he became a good person. This original idea to betray the player was elaborated on in the February 1997 Dengeki Nintendo 64 interview, archived by The Cutting Room Floor and Mother Forever, where Itoi mentions the plot including a betrayal longtime fans might have been expecting for a long time. Someone other than Itoi, the lead programmer in charge of Mother 64's scenario, suggested in 1999 that Mother as a series is always about betraying fans of the previous game, and had this to say about Mother 64. If you're expecting the heartwarming world of Mother 2, you might suddenly be betrayed. Itoi was always fascinated with evoking a feeling of disgust within the player, metaphorically describing the theme of Mother 3 as being the literally disgusting sound of Master Belch's synthesized burp from the previous game, and other unpleasant ideas like it. In Itoi's words, the theme of the project was a lot like playing against Master Belch, with many twists and turns along the way. About 2 years later, Miura would describe the main theme of Mother 3 as a desire to make people cry. Very interestingly, in this June 27, 1997 weekly Famitsu interview, Itoi mentions the game's story being sad. The interviewer remarks that they cried during Mother 2, but Itoi comments that it's not really like that. This game's story is more like, this is terrible, why is this happening to me? Then, in December of that same year, Itoi said rather than simply crying at the end of the game, you'll be crying halfway through, which is accurate, though I was wanting to cry within the first hour of the final version. He then proclaims the end might make you freeze and go, what? Really? It's a cruel game. Of course, we can mostly only speculate on what exactly changed between these two versions of Mother 3. But luckily, due to the strenuous efforts of the community, including Mother Forever and their exceptional discoveries and documentation of all things Mother 64, we have plenty of supplemental materials like the Mother 3 Times, featuring English translations I'll be quoting from The Cutting Room Floor and Kody NOKOLO, that will show us what could have been, with many clearly darker elements planned that aren't present in the Mother 3 we know now, which will be the main focus of this video. Note that because it would happen quite a bit from here on out, instead of audibly saying quote-unquote every time I directly reference a Mother 3 Times article, I'm going to show a scan of the original page and its translated text whenever I read from it. You can also always turn on subtitles to see the nuances of my script, which reveals when exactly I'm quoting the cutting room floor and or Kody / the Mother Forever team's work. With that out of the way, let's first discuss the curious case of missing and or kidnapped villagers, which Mother 64 had a surprising amount of. The town lumberjack Lighter of GBA Mother 3 apparently used to be known as Captain Lighter, and he owned a fishing boat called the Hitemi Maru. His son's name is still Fuel, though in this version, they both went missing when out on a voyage, and were thankfully rescued 5 kilometers offshore near Great Scale Village, a location that likely became what we know as Cerulean Beach. While sailing southbound, the family was reportedly attacked by some mysterious large creature. The two of them suffered minor injuries, though seemed to otherwise be in good health, so they were taken to Asohe for recovery, where the Asohe Coast Guard plans to interview them once they've fully healed. The truly grim news in this, though, is that Lighter's wife, a Mother 64 exclusive character named Tobacco, was apparently also on board the boat and went missing along with them, but was never found and therefore presumed dead. The creature that attacked the fishing boat was very likely the two-headed great-scale kraken, who snatched up Fuel from the back of its mouth in this 1997 screenshot, and in this Space World sizzle reel footage recovered by Zen64. Another missing seafarer is Nana's papa, who one day disappeared from his home on the west side of Tasmily. According to the Mother 3 Times, since he was formerly a sailor, Papa would occasionally leave suddenly for voyages. However, this time seemed different, since he hadn't returned. All he left behind for his 12-year-old daughter was a photo, which she holds close to her chest each day as she anxiously awaits his return. Both Papa and Nana are said to be close friends of Lucas's family, so this news must be especially tragic for them. That's a mystery unique to Mother 64 that's been left without closure for over 2 decades. But the case of a pair of missing siblings, Nicole and Richie, was resolved well before then. Mado of Legends of Localization does seem to think that these two were named after Nicole Richie, by the way. The brother and sister duo wandered into the Sunshine Forest one afternoon to play, but failed to return home by dinner time. They were rescued by a gentle, huge creature believed to be a Drago, and brought back to Tasmily Village that same day. Another case of a missing child, though left without a resolution, is amusingly the character who has the face of Hiroki Mukodani. You see, Hiroki was the winner of the Mother 64 fan insert contest, with his likeness in-game being based upon photos that were sent to the game's art director. An important clue to the investigation of the missing boy reveals that he was spotted on the security cameras of the daily necessities retailer, the creatively named General Store, in the suburbs of Tasmily. The Mother 3 Times goes on to describe that it is clear the person seen in the camera is 12-year-old Mukodani-kun, who's been missing for some time. It is under the assumption of the Tasmily Village Police Department that the middle-aged man seen on camera with the boy is involved in the incident. The boy was last heard from in October of last year, when he said, "I want to eat some deep-fried shrimp with chili." He's been missing ever since he left home that day. It's unclear who exactly that middle-aged man was supposed to be, but one suspect could be the supposed creep found lurking in Tasmily, who calls himself a carefree guy, which is supposed to be a reference to the enemy of the same name from Mother 1 and 2. Us overseas fans know him as the New Age Retro Hippie, which is a far superior name. Funnily enough, the fourth wall-breaking article questions whether or not he is indeed the same baddie that starred in the previous games, and suggests that until the rumor is proven false, the security of the villagers of Tasmily must be taken to heart and arranged. None of the villagers have been harmed yet, but apparently there is an overhanging feeling of anxiety among the people, including Mayor P.K. Perkle. It's such a widespread fear, in fact, that a general late-night curfew has been put into place, as well as a mandate for all elementary school students to head for and leave school together. Finally, a special investigative headquarters has been set up in Tasmily Village in order to study this man. All of these happenings, to me, suggest that Mother 3 initially incorporated a lot more investigation elements into its narrative and gameplay, which makes a whole lot of sense when considering what Itoi had to say about Mother 3's initial conception, from the official EarthBound 64 cancellation interview. I wanted to do a simple detective story where the city was the main character. Then there'd be a hack detective who makes a living on investigating affairs and stuff like that. He's a womanizer who meddles into the business of the girl at the flower shop, takes a train to the next town over to work on a case, goes to the library to research materials, and lives off of the money he gets by solving petty little cases. So I thought of a project to have this worthless detective caught up in a huge murder case he starts to solve. The most important part of the plot was going to be how the story from the flower shopkeeper would change from one day to the next. That would start to add up bit by bit. She wouldn't say it the day before, but the next day, when a man really passes by and you question her again, that a man had passed by. It'd be a game about a city that continues to grow. I started making Mother 3 with that concept at its core. Remnants of this early idea for what Itoi wanted Mother 3 to be is still apparent in this 2006 release, with Tazmily Village growing and changing over time, Flint searching for his missing family members, and Lucas later investigating Wes's lost son, Duster. However, it appears that many more characters were slated to disappear in the 64 days, which would have certainly felt more like Itoi's aforementioned desire to craft a detective story. This role of hard-boiled hack detective would have also fit Flint as a character, so I'd guess that's the reason. The polygonal widower was apparently going to have a larger role in the plot than his pixelated counterpart. We're not even done talking about mysteries yet though, as there's tons of distinct, eerie enemies to discuss, including one that will now forever haunt my dreams. This shadowy entity simply named That. The Mother 3 Times reports on a photographer they sent ahead to Tazmily Village, who succeeded in snapping a picture of the creature, but was not able to capture all of its body in frame due to the cameraman's shock. That apparently has a habit of fluttering towards children and flying into their faces, so the article understandably recommends being wary when visiting Tazmily Village. Speaking of unsettling flying things, the Mother 3 Times also published a segment about a different mysterious creature a large number of villagers claim to bear witness to. According to these reports, the apparent rat with insect wings was about 40 centimeters in length, flying around the sky attacking humans and livestock. It supposedly emits a crying sound like gee, gee, which is worth noting because Mother 1 and 2 antagonist Geeg's name was inspired by how unpleasant and dreadful Itoi thought the syllable gee specifically sounds to the ears. In 64-bit Tazmily, the villagers are extremely concerned that the unknown creature may be poisonous, so to help curb the mass panic, the Tazmily Health Center began developing a strategy to catch it, involving a special mousetrap. Another big difference I noticed between the Mother 3 back then and now is Isaac. And no, it's not the fact that his older design reflects that of a troglodyte in a loincloth. In the Mother 3 we got, Isaac is implied to have heard Hinawa's death throes while he was up in the mountains, taking a break by the river after picking mushrooms. In Mother 64, instead of hearing the sounds of screams, Isaac reportedly saw what were likely pig masks, called buhei, or pig warriors, in early promotional material, while picking mushrooms in the forest, followed by a crop circle spinning around and dissipating, leaving behind a searing mark in the ground. Apparently, these so-called crop circles have been reported all over the world, too. Isaac does look drastically different in the early days compared to his final design, but so do some other notable characters, including the Claymen. According to that English translation of the post-launch Nintendo Dream Magazine interview, Itoi said this in response to the interviewer asking about the Claymen having appeared since Mother 3's N64 years. The design of the Claymen has always been a theme I've been working on in my mind. I felt their design this time was okay, but to tell you the truth, I still feel like the very best Claymen design would have turned out differently. Clearly, the look of the Claymen was incredibly important to Itoi. We can see physical proof of that by comparing and contrasting how much their designs changed between versions. These hapless slaves of sadness and endless sorrow originally looked much more pliable, featuring a shocked-looking face with a perpetual open mouth akin to Animal Crossing's gyroids, which is very fitting because gyroids in turn were inspired by terracotta clay figures called Haniwa. Hinawa? See, now we've come full circle. Sort of off topic, but this 5-second clip from the Space World 1999 trailer utterly perplexed me before I knew it was supposed to be a Clayman. With the perspective, I always thought it was a bizarre-looking save frog or some kind of chimera climbing out of the water. Let's hope that this Clayman made it out to safety, and pour one out for the Yadogarin in the meantime. These crustaceans have apparently declined in number due to recent developments in the forests. Thanks, pig masks. This screenshot here, taken at the 64 exclusive Toilet Falls, showcases an interesting bit of dialogue, reading something like, "Dad, help me." In the GBA release, Flint never actually hears either of his sons yelling out for help in this way. When he and Alec are closing in on Klaus at the Drago Plateau, for example, he finds both of his boys' shoes as proof Klaus was there, but not a voice or body to match them with. Some other video and screenshots worth mentioning is of course what looks like the aftermath of an earthquake, with the rubble containing an Onett billboard and burger sign, along with a crumbled Monotoli building from Foreside. Could this have been a flashback that would have played during Leader's speech towards the end of the game? Here's a fully charred model of Salsa with bloodshot eyes, after likely being electrocuted by Facade, along with the caged up monkeys being carried off by pig masks. This screen of Kumatora and Lucas is interesting. There's also a ghost of Wes, but he probably wasn't meant to pass away as part of the story. This looks like a 3D interpretation of what happens in Mother 1 and 2 when the heroes fall in battle, suggesting that Wes at one point was planned to be a fully player-controlled party member who could be revived after quote-unquote dying. This is supported by an in-battle screenshot from 2000, listing his name and stats. His level in the GBA version can even be adjusted in the debug room. While on the topic of death, we have a Mother series wall staple, zombies. The only zombies that appear in GBA Mother 3 are the Zombie Man and Zombie Lady, featuring physical attributes reminiscent of Klaus and Hinawa respectively, which is a sad thought, and the sheer body horror that is the Zombie Dog. None of them resemble a cyborg though, which certainly appears to be the direction Mother 64 was going for, as this dude with an almost fully metal face looks up into the camera with a robotic glowing red eye. Nippolite, the gravekeeper here, also used to look strikingly like the Legend of Zelda's Dampé of the same profession. Zombies rising from the graveyard was likely going to be a bigger plot point as well, as evidenced by this publication discussing Mayor Perkel's plans to renovate Sunset Cemetery to put to rest rumors of the Walking Dead. Everyone will feel safe in the new cemetery. You could sleep in it and have the time of your lives. Then there's the overt nightmare fuel that is this fortune teller always be with you advertisement starring Ionia. The low resolution and lighting makes this completely horrifying, so it's probably my favorite promotional picture, right up there with this pig mask hanging from a tree. As far as concept art, and as the last thing I'll be discussing today, I wanted to bring to light this piece by Itoh, depicting a village of unfortunate people in tattered clothing. One of them is attempting to eat a boot. Then there's this dog over here with what looks like a human foot in its mouth, and a building that reads Polkies, which we can safely presume is meant to be Porkies, as English L and R's are commonly a hurdle for Japanese speakers, and so they're sometimes mixed up. That's all I had for the dark aspects of Mother 64. It's been a ton of fun finally reading up on all of this stuff more in depth. I feel a lot more confident in my knowledge of this unreleased game and wish to thank the team at Mother Forever for all their archived resources that helped make this video a reality. For more things EarthBound, Nintendo, and dark aspects, please consider subscribing to the channel and or joining the PK Rockin'/Love tier on the Thane Gaming Patreon to help support my dream of making content creation my day job. Thank you all as always for watching. I'll be back with more Mother videos soon. But before that, here's a couple of bonus dark aspects for those of you who saw this video through to its end. Number 1. Shogo Sakai, Mother 3's composer, once described His Highness's theme as a song that gives off a poisonous, twisted feeling, like a ruling fist. Number 2. In a March 2000 interview translated by MyCom Inc., Itoi said this when asked about Mother 4. The production difficulties associated with Mother 3 have demoralized us, to the point where we don't want to do a 4. At this point, a Mother 4 is completely out of the question. The development team would hang themselves. Cheers!